Morning all. I thought we could go over the very dramatic encounter between Vladimir Kramnik and Topalov in round 13. Veselin Topalov playing black. So Vladimir Kramnik playing white d4, and we see Topalov playing knight f6 after c4 e6. So will this be a Nimzo engine or a Queen's engine? Well, knight f3 is played, and now black plays d5. So we're in kind of Queen's Gambit declined territory at the moment. Knight c3, and here it becomes a semi-Slav, so with the bishop locked in here. White now plays bishop g5. Also e3 is very popular in this position. Black played now h6, which is the top used move, encouraging white to give up the bishop pair. White obliges, bishop takes, queen takes, and then we see e3. So fairly trodden territory so far. Usually black in this position plays knight d7. This is quite rarer actually. g6 was played. So was this a surprise by Topalov to play g6? White now played bishop d3 and now bishop g7. So usually it's not a good idea to weaken extra squares like this with a fianchetto luxury when you've already weakened some dark squares here. But black has specific ideas. White castles, black castles. Now a very, very interesting move. You might think e4 looks quite thematic here to try and put some extra pressure on black's position. But actually a rarer move is played knight e5. It has been played before. So knight e5, what does it actually do? Well, let's see. If knight d7, I think white can just play f4 and get a very interesting attacking position here. Using that f file potentially could be quite dangerous for black. So actually black didn't actually play knight d7, but instead c5. So trying to undermine white's pawn structure. I think we're largely out of opening book here. So c takes d5, and now c takes d4 was played. E takes d4, e takes d5. And one obvious question here is about the d5 pawn. If this is taken, I think black's fine. Queen d6, the d pawn's underneath it. Say for example bishop e4, knight c6, d4 is being attacked. As well as e5 now. So black is going to get his pawn back, it seems, with interest. So that's to be avoided. Instead, rook e1 was played. So white keeps a grip on the position here. This knight is very impressive. The bishop's kind of restricted here, hasn't got g4. f5 looks particularly dangerous. With this hanging knight takes d5 threat though, which needs to be sorted out. This is getting pretty dangerous now because e5 has been made more solid. These variations are not going to work now. So black is actually forced to do something about d5. He actually defends it with bishop e6, and it looks like a bit of a bad bishop. So white's done well out of the opening. It's a small advantage. Now a very interesting move here. If black is allowed knight c6, then that would be pretty nice if white has to take, and then maybe d4 is under pressure later. White actually prevents knight c6 by playing bishop b5, taking time out to move the bishop again, discouraging things like knight c6 and knight d7. Black played here rook d8, and then we see rook c1, and it still looks like there's great pressure here against black. a6, bishop just drops back to a4. Rook d6 is played now. Okay, so what's the idea of rook d6? Well, the c6 square is covered, which makes actually something like b6 more possible if black wants to play b6. It looks a bit passive though, the idea. But the thing is, white has also got queen b3 potentially on the cards, and in fact here, after queen b3, this awkward looking b6 is played, supported by the rook in advance. So here, how does white actually exploit this position? He's got pressure on d5, he's got a nice looking knight on e5. He's trying to discourage this knight. Okay, well, knight e2 now is played, and this allows the queen actually to switch over to the king side, which could be interesting to put pressure on black's king here. b5, this doesn't trap the bishop because actually queen a3 hitting the rook is now played. So after bishop f8, now the bishop moves. There's no useful discovered attack on the queen here for the rook. Black plays now finally with his knight on b8, plays knight c6, and white switches the queen to g3. So focusing attention as a focal point here on g6. So white's still got a nagging edge here at this moment. Rook c8 is played, and potentially queen g5 is going to be useful for black. If we can get the queens off, this could be quite interesting. And then maybe king g7 trying to evict the knight later, if possible. So actually white prevents queen g5 as well as introduces the idea of h5 with this h4 move in some variations. And in fact, after knight e7, white does play h5. So it looks to be a lot of pressure on the king side here. If queen g5 in this position, hg6, we're just winning a pawn here. Bishop takes g6. That would be better for white. Okay, so black actually plays g5, safeguarding the g6 pawn. And now white tries to break open again black's king with f4, putting pressure now on this structure. Queen g7 is played. For the moment, black holds that f5 square quite well, it seems. Rook f1, threatening now f5 though. Black now plays f6. The knight goes to g4. And now rook dc6, doubled rooks all of a sudden. This looks like, is black getting some queenside pressure? Is black at least okay here? The engines indicate yes, black is equalized fully here, it seems. Knight e3. f5 looks unpleasant though to deal with. Black stops this by playing f5 himself. Now we see a structural transition actually. F takes g, queen takes g5, and white takes the queens off. After hg, you'll note that white now has, in theory, a passed pawn here, which could be dangerous in the future. But also, isn't this pawn on, or is there something with the c-file going on here? Well, in theory, taking the pawn is not the best option here, according to engines. It seems, or the engines are changing tune. It actually shows this is a very, very complex position. At depth 20, it's a toss-up between taking the pawn or playing g3. Very, very complex position indeed. What is going on here? What's the dynamic potential of black? Well, let's see. The pawn is taken. Knight takes f5. Rook takes c6. Rook takes c6, knight takes f5. The dynamic potential is the rook coming to the 7th rank here with seemingly very good effect. But white still has this lingering past h-pawn. If black mops up one or two of these pawns, then these pawns are ready to run, and black actually has the two bishops against the two knights here. So this is a very interesting scenario of this pawn versus one of these two pawns. Very interesting passed pawn scenario has emerged. The knight goes to g3, and here rook takes b2, so 2-1 pawn majority. Rook e1, hitting the bishop. Bishop drops to d7. Knight e7 check. Looks to be going to be taking that pawn. Now here is a major, it seems, technical mistake from an engine perspective. Here it seems as though black should have considered king g7. Now what's the reason behind this? Well, let's see, knight takes d5, bishop d6. What does white do with this knight here in this position? If knight e4, then either bishop e6 or c6 is apparently equal. For example, bishop c6, this looks very pleasant for black, this coordination, and that should be about equal. This it should be okay. Knight f5 check here, king f7. It's not a big deal. With g2 dropping off next, it doesn't seem that much of a big deal. So technically, it seems knight after this check, king f7 might have been a mistake. So what's the actual difference here after knight takes d5? Well, I think one key difference is the availability of this rook f1 check. So if we have a look at bishop d6 here, knight e4, does this work as well as before? Bishop c6, or actually knight takes d6. Nope, the king is actually more exposed. That's a significant difference. We can't do this variation. So it seems, yeah, this knight e4 is a bit of a pain with the king on f7. So here it's like Vladimir has actually snatched a centre pawn and he's standing clearly better now. Even though he's just got the two knights versus the two bishops, theoretically the bishops are meant to be advantageous. We do see bishop c6, and now actually rook f1 check, and the king comes to e6. What a dramatic position though, with the king coming to e6. The knight is attacked, the bishop is attacked, there's this passed pawn in the background here. And let's explore what's going on. So if rook takes f8, which wasn't played, bishop takes d5, and we're on g2 again. Black is on g2. White does have a resource, knight e2 here, for this check to block that. After king e7, rook f5, you can keep attacking black's pieces. And this gets a bit hairy, but this passed pawn is dangerous in this variation. For example, taking here, h7, and white is much better here. It's going to queen. So a very tricky position indeed after this king e6. So it's one idea, just taking on f8. I mean, what about knight c7, you might ask? The king can go to d6, still keeping an attack there. And also rook takes g2 on the cards. So if rook takes f8, fling in rook takes g2, and take here. Still, in this position, the h-pawn is dangerous again. If check, actually here, rook f6 tactically is good for d5. So if takes d5, and white is still doing okay here. But it might not be enough for a win or anything. It just technically looks a little bit in white's favour. Probably not. G4 is not the best move, just getting these pawns going. But it looks about it looks like an interesting position. I think it's a bit drawish. So anyway, a very dramatic position here with the bishop attacked, this knight attacked, g2, this rook on the 7th. Both players have got their own trump cards basically. The knight actually just retreats to protect g2, and also renewing that threat of rook takes f8 now. The bishop actually goes to g7. That apparently is the strongest place for the bishop. If bishop e7, maybe the h-pawn is more dangerous here with h6 immediately threatening h7. So that is pretty dangerous. If bishop f6 here, d5 check. So that bishop will be loose on f6. Bishop d4 check. Here, Rook d1 is apparently winning for white because of this h7 now. So knight f5, well actually the bishop's dropping off as well. So this position is good for white. Just about, he's got still a pawn here, he can win this. So a very tricky position. It seems bishop g7 is important here for the h pawn to be stopped. Knight gf5 is played, so this knight holds g2 and this knight now protects d4 and attacks the bishop. The bishop drops to h8, h6. So what's going on here? Well, it seems pretty dangerous, and it seems as though white has d5 as a forcing move, which is actually very useful in certain circumstances. And in fact, after bishop e4, d5 check is played here. So what's happening? Well, if bishop takes d5, this wasn't played, then knight g7 check, and black doesn't want to lose the bishop here. If takes, we're winning this piece, or queening. In fact, even worse. After king d8, knight takes d5, we're queening. So that's not possible. So bishop takes d5, knight g7 check is actually winning, it seems. If king d6, knight takes d5, and if takes here, rook f8, and the bishop is trapped, and this pawn again is a menace. It's going to be queening or winning material. So a very powerful move, d5 check in this position. Just to explore another one though, king e5 here. Knight g3 is apparently strong in this position, just with the idea of rook f8. So the king is blocking the bishop for a moment. So this d5 does seem to work out quite well here in this position. d5 check. King d7 was played, and now we see knight g3. So white is now threatening not just to take the bishop, but also this rook f8 will be useful to try and push the pawn through if it's not held by the bishop on e4. Bishop keeps on that diagonal, bishop d3, so against h7 being dangerous. Now here white has to play very accurately. It seems rook f8 might be quite good actually, even though it seems bishop d4 is dangerous, because king h2 is possible here, and if bishop takes e3, then rook f3, and one of the bishops is dropping, and white should be okay here. It's got that still dangerous passed pawn. So it seems as though rook f8 was plausible. But actually in the game we see rook f7 check instead. King e8. Now rook f3 is played. So white wants to play now knight ef5, for example, to hit the bishop, or this one maybe to try and make that bishop a prisoner. So here black took the opportunity to take another pawn. Rook takes a2, knight ef5, very dramatic position indeed, hitting the bishop. In this position now, it seems as though bishop takes f5 was the best. So knight takes f5, check, king h2, and black can apparently play king f7 here and potentially be okay like this. Check, check to the black king, king g6. So apparently this might just be okay for black, just about with these pawns. Okay, so very tricky position indeed to calculate all of that. In fact, black didn't play bishop takes f5, he played rook d2, and this could be seen as a technical mistake from an engine perspective. It seems like nearly 2.58 up for white after this, when it was about equal before. So the engines are going crazy about this move being a mistake. So why? Well, knight g7 check. That is the right move apparently. And now here, the strong move again, d6 check. You might ask, what is this about? Well, I think it's about the f8 square. If king takes d6, then rook, well, as in the game, it's about the f8 square. And how can black actually stop rook f8? So the process of imprisoning the bishop with the knight g7 and rook f8 kind of checkmates the bishop, basically. If king d7, it doesn't make any difference. It's the same, surely. Actually, rook f8 is an inaccuracy here, believe it or not. If rook f8 here, b4 apparently it's okay. So if takes, there's a very tricky position. b3, h7, black can take here, and actually be potentially better because black is queening his pawn. Very, very complicated stuff. So it seems here this is dangerous. The other idea though, so instead of rook f8 though, this is much stronger. Rook f7 check first. And the idea now, king takes, rook f8. And you might think, well, why is this so much stronger? b4, rook takes, b3, h7, and why is this different? Bishop takes. It's different actually because in this position, instead of rook takes h7, we have rook d8 check. The tactics rule the position here, trying to manage both passed pawns. It's the tactical variations which dictate the totally precise moves, not intuition so much, it seems. So if this was the case, so after d6 check, it seems king d7 fells, not to rook f8 but to rook f7 check. Black is actually technically losing this right now. King takes d6, rook f8. Now black played b4, white took on h8, b3. So black is prepared to sacrifice the bishop or try and queen his pawn. But now in this position, on move 50, very, very dramatic position, how to manage these passed pawns accurately. And even the grandmasters might get this wrong. They can't see as much as engines, so if it's all about precision and calculation, it's easy to see how an inaccuracy could spring in. It seems here that h7 is a good move for one of the reasons highlighted, I think, before, that after bishop takes h7, we don't play rook takes h7, we play rook d8 check to win the rook on d2. So this is fine because we're stopping the pawn here. We've got overwhelming material. So h7 looks absolutely decisive in this position actually, because of this neat trick switching over to win the rook cheekily. If rook d1 check doesn't make any difference, king f7, or does it? I don't think it makes too much difference, winning the rook on d1. So remarkably here though, h7 wasn't played. This position, it looks as though h7, and then, you know, a check, and then we'd queen. So we'd queen it quite quickly. So bishop takes h7 failing. The other thing to consider is b2, of course, but rook d8, you know, white is queening first potentially. So queens, black queens, but it's check. That's a bit annoying. King h2, but white is massively winning this. It seems +7 from the engine perspective. White has an extra piece, but doesn't have any major checks, and the king looks in trouble. But anyway, history wasn't like that. In this position, instead of h7, Vladimir Kramnik played knight 7 to f5 check. And believe it or not, this is unbelievable actually. There seems to be one move which holds the position to be equal here. Unbelievably. Despite this h pawn, despite the king being away, despite this bishop intuitively being blocked from capturing on h7, so it seems a very good principled idea in principle, you know, to stop your passed pawn from being taken, but in practice it was better to allow that for winning the rook on d2. But here black, he didn't play this, he rewarded this inaccuracy with a major inaccuracy himself. Topalov had king c7 apparently, and engines suggest this is equal, believe it or not. Why? Let's see. h7, b2. Why is this so much different? Well, there's no free check without giving up the rook. If we give up the rook, and okay, white queen's first, but king b7 here, apparently. I think this is the only thing that will do. If king c7 then queen c3 check is winning the rook, and that's going to be good even if black queen's after. But king b7 and apparently, you know, check, king b6, queen d4 check, king b5. This is just an engine continuation, but apparently black is holding the balance here. It's scary stuff. But apparently, if we get this position where queen takes d2 happens, b1 queen, king takes d6, apparently this is equal. Queen takes g5, material equal now as well. Very interesting technically that it seems king c7 is the move here. So this b pawn is being guided by the bishop. Requires great accurate calculations indeed. In the game though, this knight 7 f5 check instead of the h7 is responded to with another mistake. Bishop takes f5, and again white is now in the driving seat. White can either play rook d8 check to collect the rook on d2, or play knight takes f5 to check to try and queen the pawn. I mean, this works quite well, rook d8 check, and rook takes d2, because if bishop c2 here, then knight e2 just in time, and if b2, knight c3, and this is of course the exchange up for white, but it's actually winning as well. There's h7 here. Whoa, for rook b7. So that's one way of winning this position. But Vladimir plays the other way. Knight takes f5 check. After king c7, he's going to try and queen his pawn now with h7. It doesn't work as well, this position, for b2. So b2 check to gain the tempo. King takes check. And now queen h7 check. So the queen is on the queening square, b1. Black actually resigned here. Veselin Topalov resigned in this position. If he plays king d8, then actually the rook is stopped from checking to try and support the pawn with knight e3. This is an accurate move. Knight e3. And if rook e2, well, we can just win the rook. I think this will do to win the rook. Or not. No, we don't want to win the rook because of the queening. In this position, knight d1. So we're going to try and win this pawn. And if check here, we can play king f2. So knight d1 is winning in this position. So yeah, that was unfortunate. for Veselin Topalov. He missed, it seems, a major technical opportunity to instead of taking on f5, it seems king c7 remarkably is drawing this position. But we're kind of, this is like chess as a science. These positions in practice, when the clocks are ticking, both players are exhausted, it's unreal to think king c7 is actually drawing here like this. But apparently it is just about that the two pawns are in balance. Amazing, really, to think like this. So just to review this line again, h7, b2. This just doesn't work well for white, this particular position, it seems. Amazingly, king's getting away, coming up the board. If we don't play knight d6 check here, it's throwing queen. The king can actually just come down the board actually. The point is the bishop supporting the queening, and yeah, remarkable. Decided on in inaccuracy. The whole game outcome could have changed there with a very accurate move for this position, to have trust that the bishop is safeguarding the queen here, the potential queen. Fantastically complicated game between these two, so it made it 1-1 between them in this tournament. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.